Where were you born?
Well, just Mount Vernon. It's
Mount Vernon.
a little suburb near there.
Okay. And tell me a little bit more about your mom and dad. Give me a little bit of their background.
Well, my mom was a librarian, and my father was a manufacturer and an inventor.
Good luck, Mom.
What?
Good luck.
Oh, you're leaving?
I'll be right down the hall.
Okay.
And so, was he in the printing business?
My father, well, actually, no, he designed machines and he manufactured certain products, like if you pick up a week at a glance book,
Right.
you know, in the back there's an alphabetized, there are index tabs, and he made the machine, designed the machine to make index tabs, to manufacture them by machine. And they're stamped with little gold letters, you know?
Right.
The alphabet. And he designed machines to do all sorts of other things. The interesting thing is that my granddaughter graduated from high school 4 years ago, and she wrote a paper about her favorite person, and so she wrote a paper about my father, someone she admired.
Ah.
And she called, in the process of writing the paper, she called the company, Eaton Paper Company, that bought my father's machine that made the index tabs, and they told her that his machine was state-of-the-art today. That
No
was 4
kidding.
years ago. So, you know, he was a man ahead of his time with his machines. One thing that I realize at my age now is that every machine that my father designed and sold put people out of work.
Just that much efficiency.
Is that much efficiency. So, you know, it had its good side, and I suppose it has its detractors as well. So, but, and he used to talk to me all the time, drive me into New York. And I used to love going down since I was a little girl, and he'd talk about his business to me all the time. And I became very fascinated with it, and with what he was doing. And then later in life, he came and lived with us when I was in the legislature, and issues would come up that I would go home and talk to him about, dilemmas that I had, you know, votes that were coming up that were difficult. And I remember one of them was the county executive negotiates the contract with the county's unions, but if he can't reach an agreement, then the legislature imposes a contract for a year. So I listened to all the union people and their side of it, and I knew the county side of it, and I was having some trouble because I could see both sides. So I went home and talked to him about it, and he had about 100 people working for him, and they took a vote on whether to unionize or not, and they voted against unionizing. So he told me about that, but he also said that he saw so much exploitation of labor and workers in his lifetime that when push comes to shove, he said, I think I'd go with the unions.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. And of course, history is full of examples of exploitation of labor, certainly by the big automakers and stuff. Anyway, so that my father was, inspired me all my life. Was a big influence on me.
Alan provided me some information that your grandmother, Edith Davison, wrote a book dedicated to you.
She wrote a book about growing up around Cooperstown. It was entitled The Last to Remember, and the book said she was telling her granddaughter Joan about how things were when she was growing up. Actually, this summer I'm taking a copy of that book to the Cooperstown Historical Society. They asked for a copy of it.
Oh, wow.
Because it's so well documents life back in that era, you know. And she was a leader in the Women's Christians Temperance Union. But I always thought they were, you know, kind of a, well, you know, I came to realize that they had 3 major planks in their platform, and one was no drinking and smoking, but the others, they were abolitionists and they were also suffragists. So I began to take a little pride in what she did, instead of being embarrassed about it.
Did Cooperstown, was that where she grew up in then?
Yes, around there, Worcester, New York, Oneonta, all that whole area, Cherry Valley.
Tell me, was baseball part of her world in Cooperstown? No.
No, but my grandfather's world, that he lived for baseball, you know.
Did he? What was his team?
Giants.
The New York Giants. Did he talk to you about that?
No, but when we'd go over, he'd always be glued to his radio, listening to the games and stuff. He used to talk about it, but I did go to a couple of games when I was little. It was like watching grass grow or something.
So we're not going to get you off on a big baseball tangent, are we? You and Brielle. So you were born, and I'd probably say in the tape, in 1928, which would have made you 13 years old in 1941. Do you remember Pearl Harbor?
Of course.
What do you remember about it?
I just remember we were at a friend's house for dinner, and suddenly someone said this. They were making an announcement on the radio. I remember we all went in and heard what was going on. But and of course, the Second World War was a background of my life for quite a few years there.
So tell me about it. What was life like with your mom and dad? Did they talk about the war?
Oh my goodness, yes. My father read 2 newspapers every day, and he would talk about the war all the time, from what was going on in the newspapers. And I think the part of it that stands out most in my mind is was Russia, when the Germans invaded Russia, and the big battle of, was it Stalingrad?
Yep.
Yeah. And I can remember my father talking about how heroic the Russian people were in that war, and reading articles in the paper about how they sacrificed everything. And there was one particular thing in the paper that I always remember, and that was there was a big, what do you call it, mortar. There was a big hole in the ground.
Right.
And they had to roll out their trucks or something, and the people threw themselves into that hole so the trucks could go by.
Wow.
I've often in my life thought, I haven't ever done it, that I'd love to go back over the newspapers, or if there is any record of that particular thing, because I've always thought about it, you know, all my life, thinking, whenever I think of the Russians and some people hating the Russians and all that, but I've always sort of been intrigued with their style, with their culture, their arts, their designs, especially fashion, and but a big part of it is an admiration for their heroism in the Second World War.
Yeah. At home, you know, rations, was that part of your...
Yes, because my mother had to make margarine that looked like butter, and my father had to get gasoline and it was rationed, and I just vaguely remember the big flying horse on the gas station, and of course wherever I went, being at that age, you know, there were just so many soldiers and sailors around in uniform, and kind of just a little too young to get the full impact of that, but still it was very romantic.
Well, yeah, with all those guys and all the
Yeah.
brass and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So you're in high school during this World War II time period. Did you study it in school? Was it in classes? Do you remember people rolling out maps and doing anything like that?
I remember my social studies teacher, yes, talking about it with the maps and things.
Yeah.
And it was, I just remember the thing I liked most was whenever you went to the movies, they always had the news. It was a
Newsreels.
big segment of the news, and that big camera would swing around, the eyes and the ears of the world, you know. And that was my favorite part, going to the movies, was learning more about the war. I was fascinated with the president, and fascinated with the British royalty, and you know, all these things. It was it wasn't just a background in my life, it was a real part of my life, the Second World War.
Well, you've demonstrated that being a public servant and being involved in so many organizations which have a public outreach, including the President's
Presidential Center?
Center,
Yeah.
which is fantastic. We'll talk about that later. When you growing up, though, really there was only one president.
Yeah.
And so what was your family's reaction to Roosevelt? Were they for Roosevelt or were they against him?
Oh my goodness, I grew up in a staunchly Republican Westchester County, and my father was a Republican, and whenever the election came up, I had to go to school wearing a big button for the Republican candidate. And no, he probably bribed me into it, I don't know what, but anyway, I was the only one practically to not be enthralled by the Republican candidates.
Well, you have no concept of this because Roosevelt is iconic,
Yes.
but trust me, there was a significant number of non-New Dealers.
Oh yes, my father was among them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Really hated
And
the
my
guy.
mother and my grandparents and all the neighbors, everybody
Yeah.
were staunch Republicans. So, but there were some progressive Republicans in the bunch at the time, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I wasn't really aware of politics at that time. I mean, I wasn't very interested in politics as such. But I do know that when Roosevelt, and I know that my father didn't like Eleanor Roosevelt. Nobody liked her. I don't know. It was just crazy, wasn't it? But I remember the day Roosevelt died, and that was it was a traumatic experience.
So you would have been probably a junior in high school at the time, 1945 when he died.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Did the school do anything? Did they? Because it would have been in session. It would have been April of '45. Did they have an assembly? Did they have a moment of silence? Do you remember anything specific the school
No, I
did?
don't.
Yeah.
I don't. It's interesting that you asked that, because I don't remember anything like that.
Now, shortly thereafter, the war in Europe ended, and then shortly after that, the war in Japan ended with the atomic bomb. Was there celebration in your town? Was the bells ringing? Was there anything like that?
Yes, there was a parade. I remember there was a big parade. And I can remember they had a lot of military in the parade, and I remember great feelings of patriotism and everything. That was a big moment. Oh yeah.
So you graduated from high school in 1940.
Well, I was in the class of 46, but my friends were the class of 45, so they were all going off to college. So I went down to the office and said I wanted to go off to college in September too. So I went to summer school so I could graduate. And this was a big mistake, you know, looking back at it. Why, I don't know why I did that, but and you know, those years just flew by.
Did you, what did you do? Did you go to, I see you went to New York City in 1946. Did you go to college, or did you?
I went to a junior college, and I wasn't particularly interested in anything at the time. It was except weekends when I could go, because I was going around with dating a young man who was going to Harvard, and I spent most weekends there. And that's how I met my husband. He introduced me to my husband.
Oh, is that right? How did that happen? Tell me.
He lived right next door to him in his house at Harvard, and he introduced me to him. And I said afterwards, Bozer, what an awful name to go through life with. So, yeah, he had a lot of fun.
So when did you first meet him?
Probably around then, 46, 47.
Okay. And was he in med school at the time?
No, he was at Harvard
Just Harvard,
College.
okay.
And I wasn't particularly interested in continuing on 4 years of college at that time. I didn't get my BA degree till I was married and had children.
Okay.
I went back to UB.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, where was my head at back then? You know, I could have.
So you had a long distance relationship. He's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and you're in New York?
Yeah, well, then he went to Columbia Medical School.
Okay.
So that's when we were dating and everything.
Okay. Was it love at first sight?
Well, he told his friend that he was going to marry me,
Okay.
but I wasn't on my side because I didn't, but it grew into love.
Well, that's great. And then you did get married in 1951?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I just was involved in civic affairs, different organizations, and and I went back to school to get my degree, and then I decided to go to law school, and I took the law school entrance exam, and just at that time, a woman named Susan Lubick was in the county legislature and decided to move. She left Buffalo and the seat was empty, so they asked me if I'd be interested in running. And for the office, they called me at home. The Republican Party chairman called me at home and asked if he could talk. We could go to lunch and he could talk and about this seat in the legislature. And I said, thank you very much, but I'm not interested in going into public office. And my husband was lying on the bed over there, and I was sitting in the chair, and I was giving all these negative answers, and he was making all these faces. So, because he was so upset, when he was not approving of what I was doing, I finally said to him, okay, well, we can certainly be willing to talk about it, but I'm not really interested. So when I got off the phone, my husband said, what do you want to do? Sit on the sidelines and let life's adventures pass us by? Is that what you... he said, I know you'd love it. So one thing led to another.
So then were you appointed first of all to fill the vacancy?
No. I had to run in the election.
Okay.
And I think that the reason that they asked me was because I think with the political people, name recognition is a big part of it. And I was the president of the League of Women Voters at the time, and my name was in the paper because several issues. Voting rights was one of the big issues, interesting enough. And so I guess they saw my name in the paper enough, they thought, well, she has some name recognition. Really, it didn't, it wasn't true, but anyway.
How did you get involved in such a public involvement? You're a housewife, you go to school, you have family. And by the way, just for the record, because this is for your family, could you name your children? You have Alan, and who else do you have as far as children?
Well, then I had Andrew, who passed away in '86, and then Timothy, and then Elizabeth, and then Thomas. Just names that I liked.
Yep. And of course, Alan. We are stuck with Alan here today. So, and so with all of that, how did you find time and the energy to do something so public as some of the things you got involved in? How did you?
Well, the question would be, where do you find time to do household things? Because I kind of work the household things in around the rest of them.
Gotcha.
Because my mother told me when I had my 5th child, she said, the only way that you're ever going to have a life is if you have a efficient routine every morning where everything is done that you need to do for your household by 11 or 12 o'clock. So you have the rest of the day. So you have to get very efficient, but you have to make the time. So I guess I did the best I could at that. I certainly wasn't, my kids would tell you, I wasn't a perfect at all the details about the house, but I really enjoyed everything I did. I enjoyed my organizations and I enjoyed my family, and so I was just very lucky. I'm a very, very lucky person.
So you were the president of the League of Women Voters, and again, you talked a little bit about what was the issues of the day, but for the camera, what were the issues of the day?
Well, of course, voting rights was a big one. Education, public financing of education was a big one. The environment, even back then, there were big issues on the environment. I mean, I would certainly say that, you know, education and welfare and all those issues, the courts. There isn't an issue that you could bring up that isn't represented in the programs of the League of Women Voters, and it's a very exciting organization and to be part of. And when I got into the legislature, all the issues that came up could be, I could do research in the League of Women Voters to find out how they arrived at certain positions. So you get the pros and cons of everything, and which was extremely helpful. I mean, I just thought it was for me, it was a wonderful background and the Junior League was also in all the volunteer things that I did with the Junior League. We had a big conference on financing public education. So and historic preservation, and all these issues were in these organizations that I was involved in. So going into the legislature seemed like an extension
Sure.
of, you know, what I've been doing, sort of. And I just can't imagine a better job, a more exciting job in the whole world than being a county legislator or state or Congress. I just can't think of anything more exciting, because every day there are new issues and new challenges and new things to learn, and you get paid to do it. So when you have a staff to help, wherever I have an opportunity to talk to young women, I always say, put that down in your list of things that to consider doing with your life. Even serving just 2 years, everybody give a little service for a couple of years. But in my case, it turned out to be 18 years. I never expected in my wildest dreams to be in the legislature for that long. And but I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
So, going back a little bit to the League of Women Voters time period, was school busing part of the issues that you had to confront with? I know that Buffalo was through a federal district court judge, I think it was Curtin.
Curtin. Yeah, Curtin.
Curtin, you know, sort of monumental school busing during that time period. Were you part of that? Because it was very controversial.
Oh yeah, very. I was with the League of Women Voters at the time, and we were a friend of the court for a metropolitan remedy, not a Buffalo only desegregation, but for the metropolitan area, Erie County, and but we were devastated when they took out that part of it and just focused on Buffalo, because I knew we were doomed to resegregate that way. And that's exactly what happened. The white people went to the private schools and went to the suburbs, and now there's more segregated than it was before. It's unfinished business, big unfinished business, very controversial. And every time I ran, somebody remembered that I was in favor of integration. They said it was pro-busing. I mean, I was pro-integration, and according to the Judge Curtin, there isn't any other way to do it.
Right.
But the busing. So, but that followed me all my whole time in the legislature. Every election, there were people that said, you were for busing, you know.
So during the time you're in the Erie County Legislature, which is from, what, 1976 to 94?
78
or 78?
to 96.
Yep. And during that time period, who were the county executives?
Well, the first one was Ned Regan. And Ned Regan, to me, was the ultimate in county executives. He was just so ahead of his time, started all the environmental programs, and I mean, a lot of others. I'm a great admirer of Ned Regan. And then was Ed Rakowski, the past quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. And then it was Dennis Gorski. And he was in, for a long time.
Now Ned Regan he was a Republican, right?
Yes.
As was Rakowski. And Bogorski was a Democrat.
Right.
Did you see the seat change at all? Did it make a difference on your work on the county legislature, depending on who was in party?
Well, what mattered was who was in the majority in the county legislature. That was the main concern, because if you have the votes, you can do anything.
That hasn't changed.
Right.
And during that time period, was the legislature principally Republican, or?
Well, when I first ran, I ran as a Republican. I was, for most of my career, I was a Republican. I was the last Republican elected to anything from the city of Buffalo. I think nobody has challenged me when I say that, but you know, there just weren't any Republicans. And then I was increasingly uncomfortable because my positions were all more liberal, progressive positions. And so I never really could count on the rest of the Republicans in the Republican caucus to support any of my city issues. So I always worked with the Democrats. And the Republicans resented my working with the Democrats. But yet when I said I always said I wasn't going to run anymore, but you know, and then they would persuade me to stay. But they really kind of resented. On the one hand, they resented what I was doing, but on the other hand, I gave them the majority.
Right.
If I weren't there, because there weren't any Republicans, they couldn't find Republicans in the city. And that's why they called me up to run, you know, in the first place.
So you really, within the city itself, which is very democratic, you were that lone wolf Republican, huh?
Yeah. And then as I was a strong pro-choice advocate. So when the Republican Party abandoned that position, they had been leaders way back in that position, but then it changed. The party took a sharp right turn, and I felt I was just hanging out there alone. I was standing under a flag that didn't mean anything to me because all the national policies were the opposite of what I believed to be the right thing to do. So I was, they redistricted and they put into the lower west side of Buffalo into the district, which was 1,000 to 1 Democrats. So my husband and I, he agreed, that's it, you know, and that I wouldn't pull out, I would run, but if I lost, which we had fully anticipated, then I would change my party because I couldn't stay in the Republican Party anymore. I just couldn't because I didn't believe in anything they believed in. So by some miracle, I won the election, and then I changed my party. So the last term I was in, I was a Democrat. And then I had access. I had access to the state and the federal government through, you know, our representatives. And I could talk about my issues to them and, you know, get help where I needed it. It made a difference, but I didn't change anything I was doing, but it just made it a little bit easier. But I felt I had some integrity. I felt I didn't have much integrity staying with the Republican Party.
When you switched from Republican to Democrat after you were elected, did that change the composition of the majority? Did they go from Republican to Democrat because of you?
No, because they had redistricted and changed the number in the legislature, so it didn't really at that point. But the redistricting and the gerrymandering, that's a whole nother subject. But,
yeah.
That's what they were doing to get me out of the to get rid of a Republican.
Politics. There's the politics part of it, but you have to have politics with our system to be elected, and then from an election you then have policy.
Yes, but we are so far behind in that area. There's so many areas where, you know, Canada, for instance, in the United States, in New York, we have the Republicans and the Democrats run our election system. But in Canada, it's a civil servant who is in charge of elections. They just administer the election law. It's nonpartisan. And that's where I think we should be going. I think our system is just antiquated, and it's way time for overhauling it. And areas in San Francisco, for instance, your name is on the ballot, your party is not on the ballot. There's so many examples right in the United States, but right across the border in Canada, of how we can have good government without partisan control. And that's what I'm for. And I just always thought it was kind of silly, Republicans, Democrats, because over here on the Republican side you had Republicans endorsed by the Conservative Party. And over here in the Democratic Party, you had Democrats endorsed by the Conservative Party. So if you added up those endorsed by the Conservative Party, they were the majority. And yet they were saying the Republican, it's all doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It wasn't a major party, of course, the Conservative Party, but I mean, it's like the blue eyes and the brown eyes. Unless you really stand for something, if you've had the whole scope of conservatives to liberals on the Republican side and conservatives to liberals, which you don't have anymore, but on the Democratic side you had this, I mean, I think that they have to have some meaning, and that you could have parties, but they weren't foreseen by the founding fathers to have political parties. They didn't. And that all just came about. I did a paper on that one time. But, so, those are all things that you wish you could go back and do the whole thing again, different point of view.
If I had to designate you as a type of Republican, would you be a Rockefeller Republican?
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
Sort of. Ned Reagan was sort of a Rockefeller Republican. He became state controller.
He was a very liberal-minded. Jacob Javits was a Republican.
Yes, he's the one.
Yeah.
I'm Jacob Javits. I used to say I'm a Jacob Javits Republican.
Yeah.
There was a congressman in New York, Bill Green.
Mm-hmm.
He was a liberal Republican, and I used to call him all the time, talk to him about these issues. He was just terrific.
Well, I must tell you, we've had people like Lee Coppola and Sal Martocci and all these people at the Jackson Center. And whenever Alan's around, whether he's speaking or whatever, he said, "Alan, you can't even shine your mother's shoes. She was that good as a legislator." And Lee Coppola goes on at great lengths, Martocci. So you've impressed many, many people up in the Erie County area, and so congratulations.
Oh my goodness.
So Alan has big shoes, big shoes.
Oh.
As you reflect back, are there a few highlights on your legislative career where you'd say, this was a program or a project or an issue which I'm very proud of. I initiated it and saw it into the end zone?
Yeah, I guess there are some. I have to say that I tell young women that if you have a passion for something, you believe very, very strongly in it, run for the county legislature. Get in there. You've got a pulpit. You've got access. You've got staff to help. You can advance any project because every single issue fits somewhere into the county government. And I just can't say enough about that because I just found it to be so exciting. I just loved it. So I think we should keep in mind that anything that I did, I was getting paid to do. I couldn't believe I was getting a paycheck to do all these the work on these issues. and advance the issues. And it's very gratifying. The ones that would, every 2 years you have to run for office, and so every 2 years you say, okay, this is what I did, and these are the projects, 2 or 3 projects I'd like to work on if you re-elect me and you like these issues and want to support those issues, you know, get aboard. So all these things that I did as a legislator, it was so helpful to advance these causes, like the Olmsted Parks. I'm just thrilled that Alan is interested in those too. And historic preservation. The county owns and manages 3 National Register architectural gems. The Botanical Gardens, an old county hall itself, very historic, beautiful old building, and the old post office. And all those, that issue of historic preservation began before I got in the legislature. So when these things came up, you know, it just was fit into my interests. So yes, I would say there were things that in the legislature that I could pursue. One of them, I was just talking to Alan about it because the Erie County and Niagara County have a regional planning board, and I had one. All regions in most states have regional planning boards, and Erie County executive decided didn't want to fund the Erie Niagara Regional Planning Board, and so it was a big fight before I left the legislature. We lost by 1 vote to keep the Regional Planning Board. But now Alan is involved in the Greenway, which is a commission, which is, you know about that. Mm-hmm. And that is our major regional planning entity now. So that was something an issue that we lost. You win some and you lose some, and that was one that we lost. But you asked me about the issues that I worked on that give you great satisfaction. I would say yes, there are 3 or 4 that are just, you know, feel good about.
Brielle gave me this article. It's a 2002 article called It's Time, and it said, Joan Bozer is always thinking in a creative way and encouraging those around her who are resistant to change to do the same. Her urgings isn't always gentle, but it's very persuasive and usually effective. Is that you? Is that you?
Oh, I remember I know who did that. You know,
Joseph Ratter.
Yes! Yes. We served on a board together. We didn't always see eye to eye.
Well, he went on to say that those who know Joan Bozer know she has a way of making dreams come true.
Oh, we said that?
Yes. And Joan, he went on to say, I'll just keep reading here. It's great.
Oh.
Joan Bozer calls herself a gadfly. Webster says that's a person who intentionally stimulates and provokes others. Somewhat true, but those who know Joan Bozer will know that she does this in a very charming way, and that's probably why she gets results. And he concluded by saying, live every day to the fullest and bloom where you are planted. She's one of the most active people we know, and that's what keeps her forever young.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll give that to you. You can take that with you.
oh my goodness.
But that's her work. So Danielle, Brielle has done a lot of work. You ask her questions.
Well, when you mentioned earlier how you were asked to run when you were considering to go to law school, did you ever end up actually going to law school?
Did you go to law school?
No, I said somebody left the seat in the legislature. That's when they called me up to run for that seat. That's what happened. I had to make a decision. And I had kids still at home. And I needed a little flexibility, and I decided to go to, the legislature to take that job, seek that job.
Yeah.
And,
Tell me a little bit about the Western New York Sustainable Energy Association. You've done a lot of work with that.
Oh, well, we started that because I moved into this house that I live in and had an all-glass room on the back of it, and it had 2 little fans and a thermostat. And when this all-glass room, in the wintertime, if the sun was shining and you had the thermostat set at 68, when in the wintertime, the sun would warm up the room, and then the fans would go on and blow the hot air, warm air into the house, and the furnace would go off.
Wow.
So I lived in the house about a year, and it suddenly dawned on me, that's a passive solar room. I was reading something about, that's what they mean by passive solar. And so I became interested in solar energy. So I joined the American Solar Energy Society, and I went to all their annual conferences. Albuquerque, I went all over, and learning about solar power. And so we started, then we decided we'd put solar on our house, on the roof of our house, which we did. And we decided we needed to advocate for, because I learned that with solar power, that you clean up the air, there's no pollution, and so I started talking to friends about it, how could we promote the use of solar energy. And through the American Solar Energy Society, they said you should have a tour every year to show the public places where they have solar, and so people can ask questions and everything. So a group of us started. For 7 years we had a tour of solar homes and buildings, and at first there are hardly any. There are only a handful, I think about 5 or 6, and then it started taking off. And then through the legislature, I was putting in bills that the legislature, the government should put solar on all of our municipal buildings. And we started agitating and promoting. And so then we had an opportunity. We put in a bid to have the American Solar Energy Society have its national conference in Buffalo. So in 2009, for the first time, they came east to Northeast City, and 4,500 people came to Buffalo to the American Solar Energy Society, and that percolated around, the more awareness and everything. And so then, I don't know how it happened, but we saw this advertisement for the solar-powered Ferris wheel in Santa Monica, California. So we thought, and in 2001, when we had the Pan American Exposition Centennial Celebration, we brought an architect from Cornell to Buffalo who said, well, why don't you have a solar-powered carousel like that solar-powered Ferris wheel? Why don't you have one in Buffalo? And so we started, the Sustainable Energy Association started looking into that, and the end result is that we started a little group to get a carousel and have it solar powered and put it on the Buffalo waterfront. And that was way back in early 2000s. And so it was just sort of a dream, and then we got UB to make a model of a little carousel with a little solar panel on the top, and we would sit it in a beam of sunlight, and the little paper carousel would go around, and we showed it to everybody. You know, I just keep thinking I must be boring you here.
This is fabulous. We're in the
slightest. You are going through all of my notes that I wrote down in order of what I wanted to ask you about.
Well,
no, it's awesome.
Well, anyway, we make the long story short, the Herschel Carousel Factory Museum in North Tonawanda took an interest in what we were trying to do, wanted to help us, and so we gathered. What we did was we had another model made at UB School of Architecture of a solar-powered carousel, and Mark Summer of the Buffalo News put the picture, and we had 2 or 3 people came to my house, and we had this model, and we don't have a carousel or anything. We have nothing. We have no land. We have nothing. Okay, it was just a concept. So the Buffalo News came, Mark Summer came to the house, and here's this carousel model. So he makes this big story out of it. He put a big picture about the solar-powered carousel, and well, then the first thing that happened, people were reading the article, and 2 people called up and said, can we help? We like the project and everything. So they came aboard, and so one of them is Lori LaDuca, and she's a carousel enthusiast, passionate about them. And so she started searching for a carousel. So we found this menagerie carousel someplace in the country, Ohio. And so we put together, and we got the solar people to give us an estimate what it would cost to put solar panels. So we had this proposal, and so I know Bob Cressy of the Wen Foundation, so I called him up. So he said, well, come on in. So we went to the Wen Foundation, and we told him about the solar-powered carousel for the waterfront. And lo and behold, they agreed to purchase the carousel, $250,000. And so, then, but we had no land. What are you going to do with the carousel? So the next thing that happened, it's just amazing. The next thing that happened is the mayor found out about it. We didn't even go down there and ask for land or anything, but then first thing that happened, the mayor got up in his State of the City address and said the city was going to donate an acre of land at Canal Side for the carousel. And so, oh my God, you know, so here we, oh my gosh. First, so there we were. So we had a carousel and we have the land. So we have to have a board, we have to have a 501c3, and all this, and then Jim was involved in it because he was the lawyer for the Herschel Carousel Factory Museum. All these different parts came together, and here we have they just poured, 3 days ago, they poured the concrete.
Wow.
And the carousel, they had this fabulous restoration, all these people volunteering, painting all these horses and fixing them all up. And so it looks like it's going to go in on the waterfront in 2021.
Fantastic. Congratulations. I love that story.
Isn't that an incredible?
It is.
I think it's amazing, and just your little influence, which seems to you to be probably little, and just an idea that you had at your house has grown and has inspired the entire city of Buffalo to move towards sustainable energy.
Hopefully, because we're going to have, one of the best parts of it is we're going to have educational programming to show how we're making electricity from the sun for kids,
Yeah.
and how the laws of physics and math and science are involved in the actual operation of the carousel. So it'll be educational.
That's awesome.
And it'll hopefully inspire. But the bottom line is, though, it will affect our image as a region, that you have, that you're going into cutting edge technology. It just says something.
Yeah.
Solar powered carousel.
And
you
it
know.
might force or pressure the city to improve in other ways in other
Yes.
areas because of having that image.
Yes,
So
yes, sadly.
I think that's really awesome.
Let me jump in for a second, because you and I met for the very first time with Mary Sacamando Friedman
Oh, yes.
and the Presidential Center. So tell me, how did you get involved in that? Mary Ann Sacamando Friedman is a lady who is an attorney, the first female president of the New York State Bar Association
And the county bar.
and the county bar. She's first everything. And has been down here to the Jackson Center. You may have seen some of her stuff. So how did you connect with this project?
Well, we started talking about it when Austin Fox was still alive, which is many years ago. There was, and Mary Ann and me and Clyde Eller and Austin Fox way back. He was the head of the Landmark Society. And so we started talking about the fact that any other city that had two lawyers that rose to be president that were residents of Buffalo would make something of it. And there were no, although their footprints are all over Buffalo, everything named after them, streets and colleges and everything, but there's nothing, no place where there are papers or artifacts or the story can be told about these two lawyers that became president, and all that they've did for our community. So we decided we'd create a virtual museum. That's what we talked about when you came to Mary Ann's office for that.
Right? Okay.
And we'd have it on TV, on our computer, where we get started, and that we would write a grant. At the beginning, we were going to write a grant to the humanities, and when we called the humanities people about just to explore it, they said, "Oh, that's filling a niche. That niche needs filling," something like that. Made some comment that was encouraging, and so we just gradually drew people together. We had an event. We talked a lot to people. We were mostly just talking to people, and Greg came to that, and a lot of other people, and they encouraged us to, let's keep going. Yes, it's worth. Yes, let's explore the possibility further. And so there was also Sarah Slavin, who taught at Buff State, who was an enthusiast for it. So here we are now. We've been meeting in Mary Ann's conference room, her law firm's conference room, and but we'd have our annual meeting at the downtown library. Well, the downtown library said, why don't you consider having your office and headquarters in the library? So we started negotiations, and now we have moved in, or moved the Richardson people had this big presidential collection of artifacts and things, and they donated them to our organization. So we needed a place to keep those. So now we've moved all our stuff into the library. We're going to have a kiosk or something. Hopefully we'll have a presentation. I mean, someone envisioned having an ongoing presentation. You just push a button and you'll see the history, a little about the history of Millard Fillmore, Grover Cleveland, and other Buffalonians who became prominent in national affairs. We included them too. And so now we've gotten on, the county has a line in the budget for the presidential center. Not very much, but it's a start. And both, I mean, Grover Cleveland and Millard Fillmore are associated with Phillips Lytle and Hodgson Russ, our two largest law firms. So I think they've got, hopefully they have some history that they can bring to the table also and get enthusiastic, and the Buffalo Club. And you know, now we've drawn people in who, and including, what's his name, Brady, who wrote the book about, he says that Buffalo has more presidential associations than any other city outside of Washington, D.C. And every president after Grover Cleveland has visited Buffalo, and some of them 2 and 3 times. And there's no other city that can make this claim. So we have this big exhibit now about all the presidential visits. And of course, when Lincoln's body was brought through Buffalo, they said Buffalo had the grandest and best ceremony or whatever surrounding that visit. So we've got an awful lot, but we still have to conserve all the papers that may be lying in County Hall and City Hall and around in these different institutions. Like maybe Hodgson Russ has some papers and maybe they want to keep them, but at least we'll have a record. This is what is there. You know, this is what's at the Buffalo Club. This is what's at UB. This is, and you know, everybody agreed that's a good thing. Pull it all together. The Millard Fillmore Trail, or the.
Well, actually, right next door in my office, I've got a couple of Grover Cleveland matters, items that when he was a lawyer, that I picked up a long time ago on. So I'll make sure you get copies of it. And,
oh, great!
Yeah, I showed it to Brielle just the other day. So, and if Alan were nicer, I would give it to him. But you know, I have to work with that.
So we have
Oh, it's a great idea. I love the concept. That's much of what we did at the Jackson Center, was to find things.
Yeah.
And frankly, they're in attics and bookshelves.
That's it.
You don't know until you start really advertising it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we just keep going. We have what's this in Swytec from Hodgson Russ, and we're determined. I'm determined that somebody from Phillips Lytle's got to be on the board. It's just.
Well, absolutely, and I know when you're determined, you're serious. I can see it in your eyes, man. She's good, isn't she?
Yes.
She is really good. So here you are at a very young age, very
Yeah.
enthusiastic. And what's next? I mean, you're not one to let moss grow on you. You know, you're not retiring. So what's next? What's the?
Oh my gosh, there's just so much to. There's so many places to go, especially with climate change and all that. And the other thing that we're still ongoing is down on the outer harbor of Buffalo. We call our group the 21st Century Park on the outer harbor, and where there was a plan to completely develop all the land, every inch of the land, with condos and everything. Our group was pressuring for them to instead put a park there, and that Olmsted, when he laid out the Buffalo Park and Parkway system, he included South Park. He designed it to go on the shore in South Buffalo, but that didn't happen because they said they wanted that land for industry. So Olmsted had to design South Park and the Botanical Gardens where they are today. But he envisioned the park system reaching all the way to the lake, to Lake Erie. And so since he didn't do it then, we're saying here's an opportunity to put a park. It doesn't have to be designed by Olmsted, but a park for the people, public park, for the people instead of privatizing it. So we worked at that for 2 years. We had presentations, and we got some money from the Greenway, and we're just very excited about the possibility of doing that. So now, then the governor created the little park down there, the state park, down where what used to be there, Pier 1, or some of those places down there, okay. But the small harbor down there. And so, and up here is all this beautiful land along Lake Erie that we want them to turn into a park. But so gradually these other organizations all started coming aboard. So now there's our outer harbor group, and it includes all the environmental groups, and it's just, and the Partnership for the Public Good, and all these groups are pushing to have that made in. We want the governor to ideally just include it in the state park and make it so that our shore, like Chicago, has 18 miles of waterfront park for the people. And so we say this land should belong to the public, and it would fulfill Olmsted's vision of, Buffalo Parks leading, on Lake Erie, and Olmsted's 200th birthday is coming up in 2022. So we envision that the governor would get up there and say, this is a way to celebrate Olmsted's 200th birthday.
She's thinking. I like this strategic plan.
To envision that happening. So that's a very exciting. When you drive down there, we've had a lot of press conferences down there at the outer harbor. It is the best place to view the sunset over the water there. There are only 3 other places where you can see a sunset over the water like that. And so that would be just great for Buffalo, wouldn't it? Because what a waterfront, Niagara Falls, we should be known, our region should be known for it already is, but more our beautiful parks and the beautiful landscapes and things.
Were you ever in ballet? Did you ever do ballet? I just saw you do this whole thing like this. It was very poetic. While you were talking and persuading both Riel and me, I could just see this movement.
You're a
This
magician.
movement,
Getting
yeah.
the energy, getting people to agree with you.
She's a ballerina.
Oh, are you?
Yeah.
I did for 15 years.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
Yeah.
You're still doing it?
Not formally, just on my own. I was gonna start taking classes. I found a place in LA this summer,
Oh,
but that didn't work out so well. So
all right.
hopefully that'll be soon. But yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. That really enriches your life to have a, don't you think? Have
Yeah.
an interest like that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Okay, you probably want to wind this up.
No, you have more questions?
You have more questions?
No, actually.
Now you have a notebook and you had notes. Now what is it that we should be asking you that we have not?
Okay. The notes I wrote down were that James Monroe visited
I didn't.
Buffalo in 1811, and John Quincy Adams came, and Millard Fillmore took him to church here.
No kidding.
And then I mentioned TR site, and that every president since Grover Cleveland has been to Buffalo. Those were my notes.
Now, is
Because I wanted to tell you
Robert
that, because I thought that was fascinating.
That's amazing to me. I did not have a clue. Now, did Grover Cleveland's grandson, is he still alive?
Oh yes, he's been here. Yes.
It's George, isn't it? George?
Yes, that's it. I couldn't think of his first
We
name.
tried to get him here at the Jackson Center, and something happened, but Mary Ann Sacramento Friedman spoke for him, and we had an event like that. She's remarkable, isn't she?
Absolutely incredible.
Right?
Now, women's rights is the other thing that because our group, we formed this Buffalo Niagara chapter of the Women's Rights National Park in Saratoga, and I'm sure that you've been there,
I don't think
but if you haven't, you have to go.
Yeah.
And it's a national park, but we have to struggle because when they look at the federal budget, they a couple of times have attempted to say, well, it's just a women's rights national park. We have to make sure that it's the superintendent there, and that it's that's where the first Women's Rights Convention took place, and in 1848, and has been preserved. And one of the dreams would be to they have the transcripts of what was said, who was at the first Women's Rights Convention, and what they said. They have a transcript. Can you believe it? And they reenact that women's convention. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and everything. And so a couple of us think, well, it would be great if you could have a hologram, have holograms there. And, Al Gore, are you familiar with holograms?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the last one was that I saw on TV was the night that Barack Obama won the election, and they were going to have the big party in that park in Chicago. On Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room, the woman standing under a tent in the Chicago park was hologrammed, or whatever you call it, onto the, right in front of you in Wolf Blitzer's Situation Room.
Wow.
And the other one was Al Gore when he gave his first climate change presentation. He was in one city, his hologram was in another city, and then the third one was Tony Bannon, that was the head of the Birchfield Penny. He was ran the Eastman House in Rochester, and he told me that they had a hologram of George Eastman put in for their big fundraiser. People would come in the door, and this hologram of George Eastman would greet them. So we thought, why not immortalize Meryl Streep? She could come and play any one of the characters she wanted. And Sandra Bullock, who played Alice Paul on the movie, she could come and be, what?
Well, the Comedy Center here, they have a hologram of Jim Gaffigan. So they have the technology here. It's run by, or helped built by Disney. So maybe the Comedy Center could get involved, and there's so many A-list comedians, really, and actors that have recorded, I don't know what to call them, holograms or pre-recorded things for the Comedy Center. Maybe whoever's in charge of that could help.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yeah, that's an amazing idea.
And then that would guarantee pretty much that it would continue.
Yeah.
Because it would be a flow of revenue, and the like weekends, it'd be advertised at 2:00 on Saturday, 2:00 on Sunday. See
Yeah.
Meryl Streep. I mean, you bring these people in, you know.
Yeah, or they could, I mean, what they do at the Comedy Center is it just runs continuous whenever someone's there, like every 15 minutes or something.
Yeah.
So anytime someone goes, and they could just play it on command, basically, whoever runs the park. I think that'd be an amazing idea. I honestly didn't even know that existed. I had no idea that was preserved as the space for the first women's voting, all of that. I had no clue that existed. I think it would be a thing of huge interest if it was advertised more, and if there was something to bring people.
Yes, wouldn't
Yeah. Major tourist attraction too. I think that's incredible.
What are you doing in her project?
He honestly is the one who probably knows.
What she's doing is, she's a master. Because I do the same thing, and I love it. She opened the door, didn't she? Brielle opened the door, yeah. Well, when you come
I'd love
back,
to be involved, but
yeah, there you go. She's going to be in Los Angeles soon, so she'll be with all the entertainment.
Doesn't matter where she is.
No,
She can
that's
do
precisely, yeah, that's precisely. I think you got your hooks into her. Remember, she did all the research on you. I'm just playing it out.
it. But it needs to be. It's something. If it interested you, it could. You could take it on as a project. It would be so fabulous.
I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wherever you are. No matter.
I mean, really, but you have to have. It has to be something you really want to do.
Yeah.
'Cause, otherwise, but it just seems there are so many opportunities. You trip all over the opportunities.
I mean,
Especially women's rights.
honestly, maybe me being in LA would be a good thing for
Yes.
this.
Well, you continue to talk. I'm going to find that Grover Cleveland thing and show you.
My job this summer was supposed to be with ICM Partners, who is the largest acting agency, music agency, really, in the world. It's bigger for acting, where there's CAA, that's more for music. But I was supposed to be working there, training to be an agent this summer, and that got canceled and pushed until next year. So, I mean, who knows, like what would happen, but meeting the right people that would know how to get that in motion would be incredible. And the people at whoever, I have no idea. Greg, I'm sure, knows who it is. Whoever runs the Comedy Center already has some sort of contact.
Yes.
At least with Disney. So I think that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Oh, you know, there's a woman, her name is Nan Johnson. She's my age, she's an older gal. And she was in the Monroe County Legislature while I was in the Erie County Legislature. She taught at University of Rochester. She let's see what she started the Susan B. Anthony Center at the University of Rochester, named Nan Johnson. So she got out. She got out there to California. They moved to California. I have to find out exactly where she is. And she got the idea that there should be a float in the Rose Bowl parade of women's rights, suffrage, to celebrate the year suffrage for women.
Yeah.
And they raised all this money and they had the float, and it was just fabulous. She's a doer, you know, she's really a dynamo. And she has all these contacts, you know, and I could give you her name and you'd get in touch with her and she would help you. So would so would Marilyn, who's the head of Friends of Women's Rights National Park. They loved that idea, but they said to me, well, how would you do it? But you know, I was involved with my carousel and everything, and this other thing is just burning there to see somebody do this, because it's sort of a shame. It's not the most convenient place to get to, and so since it isn't, there's no public transportation there to the Women's Rights National Park or anything, and so this would be something that New York State, I love New York and everything, they'd probably love that.
Yeah.
The tourism people would absolutely love it.
I think that would be incredible too, especially because I noticed within the less than 5 years or so, when you drive across New York State at all of the rest stops, they give the history of the area of where they're doing the rest stop, and they have those little like I Love New York shops and stuff. That could be something that's because I don't even know what road it is, but the road that kind of goes from Albany all the way through Buffalo, whatever highway that is, there's a ton of those there, and that could be a huge thing, leading people, tourists, mostly from Canada, to that as well. And that, because that extends all the way, it goes from Buffalo to Albany and then down the Hudson to New York City, that whole
yes.
And then it ends in New York City, and that somehow advertised there, I don't know, on Penn Station or Grand Central Station as just like a little marketplace. I think that would be awesome.
It would. Seneca Falls also has the National Women's Hall of Fame, and they just it's fabulous. I haven't gone the last 2 years, but I went almost every year to the installation. They had an installation into the Women's Hall of Fame. All these fabulous women, you know. Yeah. Interesting footnote: when they inducted Hillary Clinton into she came with her husband, with Bill Clinton. I was so upset because they walked in and all the women flocked around him. I was that is a rude. Like everybody, all of us were very upset.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's going down there to the installation of the Women's Hall of Fame, meet all these fabulous, fabulous women and hear their stories. It's just so wonderful. Yeah. So they're two wonderful draws. They've just bought this mill down on the water. It's so picturesque, this old historic mill, and it's been converted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, and they're moving into it. And but I worry about the Women's Rights National Park, because they'll say, well, this many people went to this, but this many, but a lot of people go, but it's hard to get to because there's no public transportation.
Yeah.
So this is
Something to-
a document, 1858. And this is when he was in a, this is him, signature is notarized. And it's on Bowens and Rogers, but that's Grover Cleveland there.
Oh! Oh my goodness!
So cool.
Ah, what a prize, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make copies so we can give it to Alan. So I'm supposed to ask you what you said to Alan's kindergarten teacher when you took him to school for the first time. He asked me to get it on film for the family.
He was embarrassed about that, you know. Well, I thought Alan was, you know, I just thought he was a fabulous child, you know, so precocious, so bright, and so.
Mom, you don't have to answer that question.
What?
You don't have to answer that question.
And so when he went to kindergarten, and then we moved, and so we had to change, and he went into first grade at School 66. So I said to the principal at School 66, get ready because Alan is going to be coming to the school, and he is so bright. And when I think back on it, I'm so embarrassed, but I wanted them to be prepared.
Yeah. Well, that was in when he came to Phillips Lytle. That's what he said. I am so bright, per my mother. That's what he said. So that's why we brought him in, you know. He probably never told you that story, did he? And this is another legal document. This is 1856. And yeah, this is again, where you see the check mark, Grover Cleveland.
Grover?
That's Grover Cleveland.
Oh my.
And let's see. He's signing right there.
Oh my gosh.
And it's a satisfaction of judgment. So somebody had a judgment against them, and then he, as the lawyer, signed a satisfaction with it. And this was filed in the court papers, but that's Grover, and that's Grover, 1856, 1858. And this was part of the law firms which are in the genealogy of Phillips Lytle.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we'll make sure that you know where they are.
That's great. What's that?
This is a picture. Do you have one of these things? I'll give it to you. You can have that as a souvenir.
Oh,
Is there anything
look
else?
at his mustache. It looks like, you know, he combs it carefully or something.
Oh.
The mustache.
Ooh. I'm not a fan.
So you're going to get copies of these?
I'll get copies of those, and you can have that.
Oh my. That's wonderful.
And I have copies of other letters, though his handwriting is not the easiest thing to, in fact, here, let's put this, I'll put this in here. His handwriting is not the easiest to read, so I'll get you copies of some other things I have in here.
Could you put all your contact information
Absolutely.
so I could be in touch with you?
I would love that.
Be fabulous. I'm so glad I came today.
I'm so glad you came today.
I'm
This
so
is a
glad to
highlight.
meet you.
Yeah. And Alan finally probably got some work done while we were doing this. That's good. That's good. In fact, I'm going to put this on the other side of this. This is the article by Joseph Ratter. You probably have it, but he says so many nice things about you.
Well, there's one little snide remark in there, right?
Well, I didn't bring it up.
Not so gentle or something?
Yeah. Well,
Gee.
persuasive. Yeah,
I don't
nice.
like that.
Yeah, her urging isn't always gentle,
Yeah, I don't like that.
but it's very persuasive and usually effective. So that's perfect politician.
Well, that means that you're strong in your persuasion, so I think that's
Well,
better
it
than
does-
gentle.
Well, I love your smile on your face and your enthusiasm. That's what's great.
Oh. So this is going to, I can give this to, it's so good to do this. I could give it to my family.
Yes.
Oh my. That's great. Really.
So is there anything you want to say about your family while you're on film?
Oh, about my family?
Yeah, anything you want to say? Other than they're really nice and all that other stuff.
How outstanding they are and everything. Well, they're a lot of fun. Just, they're all so different, but they're all a lot of fun. And Alan is always, there's one thing I admire about Alan is that even though he's my son, I can say it, that he, when he was little, he could manage his time well. It's always like that ever since he was little. He, in his mind, decide how he could do all these different things and get it in the time he had available. And do a good, excellent job of everything.
Well, he's an excellent attorney. I don't want to blow him up with a glory gun, you know.
Keep it up, keep it up.
Yeah, you know this. But before we go, we should talk a little bit about your husband. He was a cardiologist, and you were married a long time. And tell me a little bit about him.
He enjoyed adventures. We wanted a big family, and he spent a lot of his time preparing for our vacations and where we would go and what we would do. He always made time to take Alan and his brothers on a canoe trip up to Canada every year in the summer. And he was a very conscientious physician, and he would see a patient and he would come home and read over what he did and send him a letter about what happened, what he found and everything. It's just very, very conscientious and very caring about it. He loved the practice of medicine. He wanted to be a doctor from the time he was real little. And but he was also liked to, what is the word I'm looking for? He just on the spur of the moment, he'd like to do something.
Spontaneous? Spontaneous?
Yes, exactly. And he loved traveling. He loved just driving around and seeing New York State and the country. And he planned our car trips with 5 kids to California and back. Twice we did that. And he was a great dad. And he and Alan, they had a special relationship, I think.
Well, we're special to have you here today. Thank you for giving Brielle and me an opportunity to listen to a little bit of your
Well,
story.
I don't quite understand why you did it, but I to sit and talk about yourself for so long, there's just something kind of about
Well,
that.
this is for your family.
Well, that's what he told me that I could give it to the family.
You give it to the family and Sal Martocci. Those are the people who want to see it.
Sal Martocci?
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, you know Sal?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's no, I'm just kidding there. but he spoke so highly of you. Both Lee Coppola and Sal Martocci said Joan Bozer belongs way up here in the as a real leader. So you've impressed those two guys anyways.
Oh.
And you have inspired me.
Yeah.
You're
Okay.
very inspiring. Oh, thank you very much.
Now,
Yes.
do I understand you correctly? I don't want to get my hopes up too high, but I understand that you have have an interest in this,
Yes.
and
Yes.
that you would be willing and interested in talking to Nan about it.
I would love to speak with Nan. I'm going back to LA. Well, I'll be there July 1st. So
Oh,
at the end of next week, school starts back up in August. But I would absolutely love to get in touch with her and see if we can brainstorm some things.
it was worth it. To come to meet. Well, I mean, this has been. It was kind of fun actually, recalling some of those things. You know.
Well,
Kinda-
it's fun for us to listen to them. My golly.
Well, there's a lot more to be done. I mean, we're just kind of concerned about my country, and I'm concerned about the future. And there's just so much that right now I'm trying to. I don't know what to do. I'm just an older person, and I don't know what to do. But I'm just concerned about people who had to stand up, wait till 3 a.m. to vote in Georgia, things like that.
Yeah.
And what can, I was talking now at breakfast, what can be done, because the only thing I know is that we have a federal Voting Rights Act. So the federal government is into elections. So I don't know if there's a way to hook onto that, but it just seems to me for a presidential election where all the people are voting on two people, that's all. All the people are just voting on two people. That they ought to segment, have rules that for how people are going to vote nationally for those two people. It's a national universal rule that everybody has to do. And they have to make sure that their procedures for voting for the president are such that no one will wait more than half an hour or something like that. It's got to be some rule. There's something has to happen. You can't do that in our democracy.
Sure.
So if I were a lawyer and I were a young person, that's what I would do. I'd get the best lawyers in the world together at the table to figure out how to do that. Because somebody wrote the Federal Voting Rights Act, and somebody has to make the laws.
We need to figure out how to enforce them.
Yes.
Yeah, and I don't know how much is true or how much isn't, but I read that they had plenty of voting booths that day, and throughout the day they just kept taking them. They're malfunctioning, they're not working, they're
Yeah.
being repaired. Like,
Yes.
that's, yeah, I don't believe that.
No. And someplace they delivered a whole bunch of new machines, but nobody told them how to work them.
Yeah,
And so people come in, they don't know how to, nobody knows how to, I mean,
it doesn't make any sense.
but for president and vice president, they could all vote by paper ballot. Everybody voting for the president and vice president. You vote for paper ballot. All the rest do all the regular stuff. But these, we can't fool around with the Russians hacking in or anything like that. Just,
Yeah.
there's never any end to the issues, right?
No,
That you could work on.
the human
Stay
condition.
on it. Stay with it, Joan. I love it.
But thank you so much. I'm just so thrilled. I want to make sure I could read your
I
writing.
tried to write as clear as possible.
Yes.